The morning sun filtered through the half-drawn curtains, casting long shadows across the bedroom floor. Raj stared at the folded piece of paper in his hands, his eyes scanning the words for the third time. The handwriting was unmistakably Priya's, neat and slightly slanted to the right, just like everything else about her, organized, deliberate, and always leaning forward. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, a short laugh escaping his lips as he tossed the letter onto the rumpled bedsheets. He ran his fingers through his disheveled hair and stood up, stretching his tall frame. At 32, Raj had the confidence of a man who believed he understood how the world worked, especially his world with Priya. Their apartment felt unusually quiet without her bustling around, preparing breakfast or humming softly as she got ready for work. 5 years of marriage had created a rhythm between them, a comfortable dance of routine and familiarity. That's why this letter, this dramatic goodbye, seemed like nothing more than an overreaction to him. "She'll be back by evening," he assured himself, walking to the kitchen to make coffee. "Once she cools down, she'll realize how silly this whole thing is." The argument from the previous night played in his mind as he waited for the water to boil. It had started small, as most of their recent disagreements did, something about Raj forgetting to pick up groceries on his way home. But it had quickly spiraled, revealing deeper fissures in their relationship. "You never listen to me," Priya had shouted, her usually calm voice rising with frustration. "It's like I'm invisible in this marriage." Raj had dismissed her concerns with a casual wave of his hand. "You're being dramatic. It's just groceries." "It's not about the groceries," she had replied, her voice suddenly quiet. "It's about respect. About caring enough to remember what matters to me." He hadn't taken her seriously then, and he wasn't taking her goodbye letter seriously now. People didn't just walk away from 5 years of marriage over forgotten groceries and missed dinner dates. This was just Priya's way of making a point, of trying to get his attention. And it was working. He was thinking about her, wasn't he? Raj sipped his coffee and glanced at the wall clock. 9:15 a.m. He had a meeting at 10, and he was already running late. The software company where he worked as a project manager was in the final stages of a major product launch, and his team depended on him. Priya knew this. She knew how important this period was for his career. Surely she understood that some things had to take a backseat temporarily. As he showered and dressed for work, Raj convinced himself that by the time he returned home, Priya would be there, perhaps still a little upset, but there nonetheless. They would talk, he would apologize for being distracted lately, and things would go back to normal. The letter was just a dramatic gesture, a cry. But as he was about to leave, something made him pick up the letter again. There was a weight to Priya's words that gave him pause. "I've tried to make you understand how unhappy I've been," she had written. "For months, I've tried talking to you, but you brush it off as if my feelings are inconvenient interruptions to your important life. I can't live like this anymore, feeling unheard, unseen, and unloved. I need time to think about what I really want, and whether this marriage still has a place in that future." For the first time that morning, a flicker of doubt crossed Raja's mind. Was she actually serious? Had things really gotten that bad between them? He shook off the thought. No, this was just Priya being emotional. She was always the sensitive one in their relationship. He folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket before heading out the door. The workday passed in a blur of meetings, conference calls, and problem-solving sessions. Raj was good at his job, focused, efficient, and quick-thinking. These were the same qualities that had initially attracted Priya to him when they'd met at a mutual friend's wedding. "You're so sure of yourself," she had said with an admiring smile. "It's refreshing to meet someone who knows exactly what they want." Back then, what he wanted was her, the quiet, thoughtful woman with intelligent eyes and a laugh that made him feel like he'd won something precious. When had that changed? When had his focus shifted so completely to work and success that he'd started taking her presence for granted? These uncomfortable questions kept surfacing throughout the day, despite his attempts to push them away. By late afternoon, he found himself checking his phone every few minutes, hoping for a message from Priya. Nothing. Around 4 p.m., he texted her, "Hope you're having a good day. Dinner at home tonight?" The message showed as delivered but remained unread. Raj frowned at the screen. This wasn't like Priya. Even when they fought, she always responded to his messages. An hour later, with still no response, he called her. The call went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's me," he said after the beep, trying to keep his voice casual. "Just checking in. Let me know when you're coming home, okay? We should talk." By the time Raj left the office at 7 p.m., a knot of anxiety had formed in his stomach. He called Priya's office, only to be told by her colleague that she had taken a few days off. This information hit him like a physical blow. She hadn't mentioned any time off to him. The empty apartment greeted him like a rebuke when he finally got home. No delicious smells from the kitchen, no sound of Priya's favorite evening news program, no gentle clatter of her moving around. Just silence. Raj opened their closet to change out of his work clothes and froze. A significant section of Priya's clothes. Not everything, it wasn't a complete clearing out, but enough to suggest she wasn't planning to return the next day. Reality began to sink in. Maybe this wasn't just another argument. Maybe Priya truly had reached her breaking point. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the letter once again in his hands. This time, he read it slowly, absorbing every word, every accusation, every expression of pain and disappointment. And as he read, memories surfaced, Priya trying to talk to him about having children while he scrolled through work emails, Priya suggesting relationship counseling and him laughing it off as unnecessary, Priya's gradually fading smile over the past year. The pattern was clear now, and Raj felt a cold realization wash over him. He had been blind, willfully blind, to his wife's unhappiness. He had dismissed her concerns, minimized her feelings, and prioritized everything else above their relationship. And now she was gone. Panic rose in his chest as he dialed her parents' number. They answered on the third ring. "Is Priya there?" he asked without preamble. A pause. "Yes, Beta, she's here," her mother finally answered, her voice carefully neutral. "Can I speak to her? Please, it's important." "She doesn't want to talk right now, Raj. She needs some space." "But I need to explain. I think you've had plenty of time to explain things to her," her mother interrupted gently. "Maybe now is the time to listen instead." After hanging up, Raj sat in the silent apartment, truly alone with his thoughts for what felt like the first time in years. The reality of Priya's absence hit him fully, and with it came an overwhelming sense of regret. How had he failed to see what was happening? How had he convinced himself that everything was fine when his marriage was clearly crumbling around him? He wandered through the rooms, noticing all the small touches that made their house a home, touches that Priya had carefully created over the years. The framed photos from their honeymoon in Kerala. The handwoven throw pillows she'd bought from a local artisan. The collection of ceramic mugs, each with a memory attached to it. In their home office, he found a small box on Priya's desk that he hadn't noticed before. It contained various medical pamphlets about fertility and pregnancy planning. A wave of shame washed over him as he remembered how he dismissed her attempts to discuss starting a family. "We have plenty of time for that," he'd said repeatedly. "Let's focus on our careers first." But the most gut-wrenching discovery came when he opened the bathroom cabinet looking for headache pills. There, tucked behind a box of bandages, was a small plastic stick, a pregnancy test. Raj's heart pounded as he picked it up, and the world seemed to stop when he saw the unmistakable double lines in the result window. Positive. Priya was pregnant. And she had left without. The test slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor as Raj slumped against the bathroom wall. Tears blurred his vision, the first tears he'd shed in years. The reality of what he stood to lose crashed over him with devastating clarity, not just his wife, but his child. A family he hadn't known he wanted until this moment, when it might already be too late. In the quiet bathroom of the apartment that suddenly felt too big and too empty, Raj cried. He cried for his arrogance, for his neglect, for the pain he'd caused the woman he loved. And he cried for the future that now hung in the balance, a future he desperately wanted but had never given proper value to until now. The goodbye letter, which had seemed so ridiculous that morning, now felt like the most important document of his life. Because hidden between the lines of hurt and disappointment was a truth he had to face. This was his last chance to save his marriage, to prove to Priya that he could change, that their love was worth fighting for. And as the evening shadows lengthened across the empty apartment, Raj made a silent promise, to himself, to Priya, and to the child he hadn't known existed until today, that he would do whatever it took to earn back what he had so carelessly taken for granted. The digital clock on the bedside table showed 3:17 a.m., but sleep was nowhere to be found for Raj. He sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the ghosts of his negligence, unwashed coffee mugs, unopened mail addressed to Priya, and the pregnancy test that had changed everything. His eyes were red and swollen from hours of crying, something he hadn't done since his father's death 8 years ago. "How could I have been so blind?" he whispered to the empty room. The night had been a blur of revelations as Raj had gone through their apartment, truly seeing it for the first time in months. In their shared study, he found Priya's journal, not hidden, just placed on her desk where she'd always kept it. He'd never read it before, respecting her privacy, but tonight felt different. Tonight, he needed to understand. With trembling hands, he'd opened to recent entries and felt his heart break all over again. "I took another test today. Still positive. That makes 3. There's no doubt now, I'm pregnant. Almost 8 weeks along, according to my calculations. I should be overjoyed, but all I feel is fear. How can I bring a child into a marriage where I already feel so alone? Raj doesn't even look at me anymore, not really. When was the last time he asked about my day and actually listened to the answer? When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about his work or everyday logistics? I've tried talking to him about starting a family so many times, and he always brushes it off. Now it's happening, and I'm terrified. What if he sees our child as just another interruption to his Raj had to stop reading several times, the truth of her words too painful to bear in one sitting. But he forced himself to continue, to witness the slow disintegration of their marriage through Priya's eyes. "My mother says I need to be direct with Raj, that men sometimes need things spelled out for them. But I've tried being direct. I've tried subtle. I've tried gentle and I've tried firm. Nothing breaks through. It's like watching someone you love slowly disappear behind a wall they don't even realize they're building. Sometimes I wonder if he would even notice if I left." Those words had hit him like a physical blow. Because she had been right, he hadn't noticed her unhappiness, hadn't registered her attempts to reach him, hadn't valued what they had until it was slipping away. Now, as the first hint of dawn colored the sky outside their apartment windows, Raj knew what he had to do. He couldn't undo the months or years of neglect with a single grand gesture. He couldn't expect Priya to come running back just because he finally understood what he'd done wrong. This would take time, effort, and genuine change. He picked up his phone and composed a text to his boss, something he'd never done before: "Family emergency. Need to take the week off. We'll explain later." Without waiting for a response, he turned off his work notifications, another first. Then he called Priya's parents again, hoping they would be awake despite the early hour. Her father answered this time, his voice gruff with sleep. "Raj? Do you know what time it is?" "I know, Uncle, I'm sorry," Raj said, the formal address coming naturally even after years of marriage. But this is important. I need to speak with Priya. A heavy sigh came through the line. She's still sleeping, Beta. And she was quite clear yesterday, she needs space. I found the pregnancy test, Raj said quietly. Why didn't she tell me? Silence stretched between them for several seconds. Finally, her father spoke, his voice gentler now. She tried to, Raj. Many times, according to what she told us. But you were always too busy, too preoccupied. The simple truth in those words made Raj's chest ache. I understand that now. I've been a terrible husband. But I want to fix this. I need to fix this. Sometimes things break in ways that can't be easily repaired, her father said carefully. My daughter has been unhappy for a long time. I know that now. And I don't expect her to forgive me right away. But I need to see her, to talk to her. Please. There was a muffled conversation on the other end of the line, and Raj realized her father was speaking to someone, probably Priya's mother. After what seemed like an eternity, he came back on the line. Come for lunch tomorrow. 1 p.m. I can't promise she'll talk to you, but you can try. Relief flooded through Raj. Thank you, Uncle. After hanging up, Raj moved with new purpose. He spent the rest of the morning cleaning their apartment from top to bottom, really cleaning, not just the surface tidying he usually did when it was his turn. He washed dishes, did laundry, scrubbed the bathroom, and changed the bed sheets. Physical labor helped channel his anxiety and gave him time to think about what he would say to Priya when he saw her. By noon, the apartment was spotless, but his thoughts were still a jumble of regret, fear, and desperate hope. He showered and changed, then grabbed his keys. Before leaving, he paused at the small shrine in the corner of their living room, something Priya had set up when they first moved in. It held pictures of both their parents, small statues of deities, and incense holders. Raj hadn't paid much attention to it recently, but now he lit an incense stick and stood for a moment, eyes closed. Please give me the words, he whispered, not sure who exactly he was addressing, God, the universe, or perhaps his own better nature. The drive to Priya's parents' home in the suburbs took 45 minutes. With each passing kilometer, Raj rehearsed what he wanted to say, then discarded the words as inadequate. How could he possibly explain his behavior? How could he make her understand that he saw everything differently now? When he arrived, 15 minutes early, he sat in the car gathering his courage. The modest two-story house where Priya had grown up looked exactly as it always had, well-maintained garden out front, wind chimes hanging from the veranda, her mother's potted plants lining the steps. It had always felt welcoming to Raj, but today it felt like an examination room where he would be judged and possibly found wanting. Taking a deep breath, he finally approached the door and knocked. Priya's mother opened it, her expression carefully neutral. Namaste, Auntie, Raj said, folding his hands respectfully. Come in, Beta, she replied, stepping aside. We're just setting the table for lunch. The familiar smells of her cooking, cumin, ginger, and the distinct aroma of her special dal, filled the house. In the dining room, Priya's father was arranging plates. He nodded at Raj but said nothing. Where is she? Raj asked quietly. In her old bedroom, her mother answered. Upstairs, but... Raj, you should know she wasn't happy about you coming. She agreed only because we insisted. Raj nodded, swallowing hard. I understand. He climbed the stairs slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. At the door to Priya's childhood bedroom, he paused. Should he knock? Call her name? In the end, he simply tapped lightly on the wood. Priya? It's me. Can I come in? Silence greeted him. Just as he was about to knock again, he heard her voice, flat and lifeless. It's open. Raj entered to find Priya sitting by the window, looking out at the backyard where a swing set from her childhood still stood. She didn't turn. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a loose kurta over leggings. Even from the side, he could see that her eyes were puffy from crying. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said, standing awkwardly near the door. "My parents convinced me it was the right thing to do," she replied, still not looking at him. "They believe in second chances. And you don't?" Now she turned, and the sorrow in her eyes hit him like a physical blow. "I've given you many chances, Raj. More than you realize." He moved closer, cautiously, as one might approach a wounded animal. "I know. I understand that now. Do you?" Her voice held a bitter edge he'd never heard before. "Do you really understand what it's like to feel invisible in your own marriage? To have your feelings dismissed day after day?" "No," he admitted. "I can't fully understand that. But I want to try. I want to listen." "Why now?" Priya asked, standing up. "Because I finally left? Because you found the pregnancy test?" So she knew he had found it. "Both," Raj said honestly. "But mostly because I finally saw what I've been doing to us. To you." Priya crossed her arms protectively over her abdomen, a gesture that reminded Raj with startling clarity that his child was growing inside her. Their child. "I'm almost 10 weeks along," she said, following his gaze. "I tried to tell you so many times, Raj. The night before our anniversary dinner, I planned to share the news then, but you cancelled at the last minute for a work emergency. The weekend we were supposed to visit the hill station, I had a special announcement planned. But you said you needed to stay back for a critical project deadline." Each example was like a dagger to his heart. He remembered those occasions, remembered the disappointment on her face, but he dismissed it at the time. Just Priya being overly sensitive, he'd thought. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, meaning it more deeply than he'd ever meant anything in his life. "Sorry doesn't change anything," she said quietly. "Words are easy, Raj. You've always been good with words when you bothered to use them. But I need more than words now. Tell me what you need," he pleaded. "Tell me what I can do to make this right." Priya looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him, perhaps seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes. Finally, she sighed. "I don't know if this can be fixed, Raj. That's the truth. I'm carrying our child, a child I've wanted for so long, but I'm terrified of raising this baby with a father who's never present, who doesn't value family." "I will be present," Raj promised fervently. "I'll change my job if I have to. I'll do whatever it takes." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, but it held more sadness than joy. "That's what frightens me. You're making these huge promises now, in the heat of emotion. But what happens when real life sets in again? What happens when the baby is crying at 3 a.m. and there's a work deadline? What happens when I need a partner, not just someone who lives in the same house?" Her questions hung in the air between them, and Raj had no immediate answers. Because she was right, promises were easy in moments of crisis. The real test would be in the daily choices, the mundane moments that made up a life together. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I can't predict the future. But I know I don't want a future without you. Without our family." Priya's eyes filled with tears. "I need time, Raj. This isn't something we can fix in one conversation. Come home," he said softly. "Not for me, but for yourself. It's your home too. I can stay somewhere else if you need space." She wiped away a tear that had escaped. "I need to think about it." It wasn't the reconciliation he had hoped for, but it was something, a tiny crack in the door she had closed between them. And for now, that would have to be enough. "Lunch is ready." Priya's mother called from downstairs, breaking the tense moment. Priya moved toward the door, then paused beside Raj. "I have a doctor's appointment next Tuesday. First ultrasound." Raj's heart leaped. Would it be okay if I came?" For the first time, a genuine, if small, smile crossed her face. "I'd like that." As they walked downstairs together, not touching but not entirely separate either, Raj felt something he hadn't felt since finding her letter: hope. The weekend passed in a blur of reflection and planning for Raj. After that tense but hopeful lunch at her parents' house, Priya had decided to stay there a few more days. Raj respected her decision, though every fiber of his being wanted her home. Instead of pressuring her, he channeled his energy into action. On Saturday morning, he walked into his company's HR office and requested a meeting with his supervisor. "I need to adjust my work-life balance," he explained to a surprised Mr. Sharma. "My wife is pregnant, and I've been neglecting our relationship for too long." His boss leaned back in his chair, studying Raj thoughtfully. "Congratulations on the baby. But you're in the middle of a critical project launch. The timing is challenging." "I understand that," Raj replied firmly. "But I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you of changes I need to make. I can still deliver results, but not at the expense of my family." For a moment, Mr. Sharma looked taken aback by Raj's directness. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "About time, Raj. I've been waiting for this conversation." "What do you mean?" "I mean I was you 15 years ago. Brilliant at my job, dedicated to the point of obsession. Then my wife left me, taking our daughter with her." His eyes clouded with old pain. "By the time I realized what mattered, it was too late for us. I don't want to see that happen to you." They worked out a plan: reduced hours, more flexibility to work from home, and redistributing some of Raj's responsibilities to other. It wouldn't be easy, but it was doable. For the first time in years, Raj left the office feeling lighter, as if he'd set down a burden he hadn't known he was carrying. Sunday was spent transforming their spare room into the beginnings of a nursery. Raj cleared out the exercise equipment and boxes of forgotten items, painted the walls a soft yellow, and assembled a crib he ordered with express delivery. He wasn't trying to presume Priya would come home, he was showing her that he was committed to their child regardless. When Tuesday arrived, Raj was waiting outside her parents' house 45 minutes before they needed to leave for the doctor's appointment. Priya emerged wearing a simple floral dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. Her expression was guarded but not cold. "You're early," she observed as she got into his car. "I didn't want to risk being late for this," he replied honestly. The drive to the clinic was quiet, not uncomfortable but tentative, like two people finding their way back to a familiar path that had become overgrown with neglect. In the waiting room, surrounded by other expectant couples, Raj felt a profound sense of unworthiness. These other men had probably been there from the beginning, celebrating the positive test, sharing the early morning sickness, planning for the future together. He had missed so much already. "Priya Sharma," the nurse called, and they both stood. The examination room was small but warmly lit. As Priya changed into a gown behind a screen, Raj stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of his place. When the doctor entered, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, she looked between them with understanding eyes. "First baby?" she asked. "Yes," they answered in unison, then glanced at each other in surprise. The doctor smiled. "Well, let's take a look at your little one." Priya lay back on the examination table, exposed abdomen gleaming with gel as the doctor positioned the ultrasound wand. Raj stood a respectful distance away until Priya's hand reached out for his. He took it, heart hammering with emotion. "There we are," the doctor said softly, pointing to the screen. "See that fluttering? That's your baby's heartbeat." The room filled with a rapid whooshing sound, their child's heart, strong and insistent. Raj stared at the small bean-shaped image, and something profound shifted inside him. This wasn't just an idea anymore, not just a concept. This was their child, already living, already growing. Tears spilled down his cheeks unashamedly. "That's our baby," he whispered. Priya's eyes met his, her own filled with tears. Yes. In that moment, suspended in the whir of medical equipment and the sound of their baby's heartbeat, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of the precious reality they had created together, despite everything. After the appointment, they sat in the car, the printed ultrasound images between them. "I've been thinking, Priya. I'd like to come home. Not because everything is fixed, but because I think we need to be under the same roof to work through this. For the baby's sake, and maybe for ours too." Relief washed over Raj. "The apartment is yours whenever you're ready. I've made some changes, but I want you to know there's no pressure." "What kind of changes?" she asked, curiosity in her voice. "I spoke to my boss. Reduced hours, more flexibility. I've started on the nursery too, but I want your input on everything." A small smile touched her lips. "You painted it yellow, didn't you? How did you know?" "Because you know it's my favorite color." Her voice softened. "You do listen sometimes, Raj. That's what makes this so hard. There's a good husband in there, he just gets lost sometimes." As they drove back to her parents' house, Raj felt hope blooming like the first green shoots after a long winter. They had a long way to go, many conversations to have, trusts to rebuild. But today they had seen their child's heartbeat together, and somehow, that made all the difference. 2 days after the ultrasound appointment, Priya moved back into their apartment. Raj had offered to stay with a friend to give her space, but she insisted they needed to face this together. "It's strange," she said as they ate dinner that first night back, takeout from her favorite restaurant. "Being here feels both familiar and completely different." Raj nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The physical space was the same, but something fundamental had shifted between them. There was a fragile newness to their interactions, careful and considerate in ways they hadn't been before. "I've been looking into marriage counseling," he ventured, watching her reaction carefully. "Found someone who specializes in couples expecting their first child." Priya looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "You have?" "I made a list of options. All well-reviewed, different approaches." He slid his phone across the table to show her. "Unless you'd prefer to find someone yourself." She scrolled through the list, a small crease between her eyebrows that Raj now recognized as concentration, not displeasure. How had he forgotten that detail about her? "This one," she said finally, pointing to a woman whose profile mentioned both Western and traditional family therapy approaches. "Dr. Gupta. I like that she acknowledges cultural aspects of relationships." Raj felt a small flicker of hope. She was engaging, making choices, looking forward. "I'll contact her tomorrow." They settled into a cautious routine over the next few weeks. Raj left for work at 8:30 instead of 7 o'clock, and returned home by 6 o'clock each evening. He placed reminders in his calendar for every prenatal appointment and set aside time each weekend specifically for tasks related to the baby or their relationship. The changes weren't all. There were moments when urgent work emails pulled at his attention during dinner, when crisis calls threatened to derail their plans. But for the first time, Raj found himself setting boundaries. "I can look at this tomorrow," he told his colleague one evening when his phone rang during the birthing class they'd signed up for. "Family comes first." Priya had looked at him then with something close to amazement, and later that night, for the first time since she'd returned home, she reached for his hand as they fell asleep. Their first session with Dr. Gupta was difficult. Sitting in the comfortable office with its neutral tones and subtle incense, they took turns speaking truths that had gone unacknowledged for too long. "I feel like I've been shouting into a void," Priya admitted, tears streaming down her face. Trying so hard to reach you while you just walked away. I thought providing financially was enough, Raj responded, the inadequacy of this belief painfully clear to him now. I convinced myself that working hard for our future was the same as being present for our relationship. Dr. Gupta listened attentively, her gentle guidance helping them navigate wounds that had been festering for years. At the end of the session, she gave them homework, daily check-ins with each other, uninterrupted by phones or television, and a journal to document moments of connection and disconnection. Rebuilding trust happens in small moments, she explained. Not grand gestures. As Priya's pregnancy progressed, her body changing with each passing week, Raj found himself marveling at her strength. The morning sickness that left her exhausted, the backaches that made sleep difficult, the emotional ups and downs, she handled it all with a grace that humbled him. How can I help? He asked one evening, finding her sitting on the bathroom floor after a particularly bad bout of nausea. Just be here, she whispered, and he sat beside her, holding her hair back, bringing cool washcloths for her forehead, waiting patiently until the sickness passed. It was in these small moments of caregiving that something began to heal between them. Not dramatic reconciliations, but quiet acts of presence that slowly rebuilt the foundation of their relationship. 3 months after Priya had first left that goodbye letter, they sat together on the sofa, her head in his lap as he gently massaged her scalp. Her baby bump was prominently visible now, a perfect dome beneath her cotton shirt. Do you remember that weekend trip we took to Goa during our first year together? She asked suddenly. Raj smiled, the memory vivid. When we got caught in that monsoon rain and had to take shelter in that little cafe? And the owner kept bringing us hot chai and telling us stories about his grandchildren, Priya continued, her eyes bright with remembrance. You said something that day that made me fall in love with you all. What was that? Raj asked, genuinely curious. You said, someday I want to be like him, telling stories about our grandchildren to strangers caught in the rain. She placed her hand over his where it rested on her stomach. It was the first time you talked about our future in terms of family, not just success or achievements. Raj felt his throat tighten with emotion. I meant it then. And I mean it even more now. The baby kicked suddenly, a strong movement that they both felt. Raj's eyes widened in wonder, it was the first time he'd felt their child move. She knows her father's voice, Priya said softly. She? Raj asked. Do you know something I don't? Priya smiled mysteriously. Just a feeling. We'll find out next week at the anatomy scan. As they sat there, connected by touch and shared anticipation, Raj realized something profound. The letter that had once seemed so ridiculous, that had made him laugh in dismissal, had been the most important wake-up call of his life. Without it, without Priya's courage to express her unhappiness, he might never have understood what truly mattered until it was too late. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For giving us another chance. For not giving up on me completely. Priya's eyes met his, serious but warm. We're still finding our way back, Raj. But I'm glad we're doing it together. The anatomy scan confirmed what Priya had sensed, they were having a baby girl. As the technician pointed out tiny fingers and toes on the monitor, Raj found himself overwhelmed with emotion. This small person, already so perfectly formed, had changed everything. She's beautiful, he whispered, squeezing Priya's hand. The technician smiled. Would you like to record a short video to keep? Later that evening, they sat together watching the ultrasound video for the 10th time, marveling at their daughter's movements. We should start thinking about names, Priya suggested, her hand absently rubbing her growing belly. What about naming her after your grandmother? Kavita? Raj offered. You always spoke so fondly of her. Priya looked up in surprise. You remembered that? Of course. You told me she taught you to make those cardamom cookies you love, and how she always had stories about the stars. He smiled softly. You said she was the strongest woman you'd ever known. Tears welled in Priya's eyes. You were listening. Not always, Raj admitted. Not as often as I should have been. But some things stayed with me. That night, as they prepared for bed, Priya hesitated before speaking. The company called me today. They want me back after my maternity leave. Raj paused in the middle of setting his alarm. Before their separation, he might have immediately encouraged her to take the position, focusing on the financial benefits without considering the emotional implications. Now, he took a moment to really look at her. What do you want to do? Priya sat on the edge of the bed, uncertainty written across her face. I'm not sure. Part of me wants to go back, I've worked hard for my position. But another part wants to stay home with Kavita, at least for the first year. Instead of offering a solution or steering her toward a decision, Raj sat beside her. Whatever you choose, I'll support you. We can make it work either way. You wouldn't mind if I stayed home? Even though it would mean less income? Money isn't everything, Raj said, the words feeling like a revelation even as he spoke them. We've saved enough. I'd rather have you both be happy. They continued discussing options, part-time work, flexible hours, work-from-home arrangements, but what mattered most to Priya, Raj could tell, wasn't the solution they landed on but the fact that they were making the decision together, as equal partners. As Priya's due date approached, they transformed their home into a space ready to welcome their daughter. The yellow nursery was completed with a rocking chair, changing table, and shelves filled with children's books. Raj installed baby gates and outlet covers, while Priya organized tiny clothes into color-coded drawers. One Saturday, as they assembled a stroller together, Raj noticed Priya wincing as she reached for a part. Are you okay? He asked, immediately concerned. Just Braxton Hicks contractions, she assured him. The doctor said they're normal at this stage. That night, however, the contractions became more regular and intense. By midnight, they were timing them with a contraction app, and by 2 a.m., they were grabbing the carefully packed hospital bag and heading for the car. It's too early, Priya said worriedly as Raj drove carefully through the deserted streets. She's not due for another 2 weeks. Babies have their own timelines, Raj said, projecting a calmness he didn't feel. Inside, he was terrified, of complications, of not being able to support Priya through the pain, of the enormous responsibility that awaited them. The next 18 hours were a blur of hospital corridors, medical jargon, and Priya's increasing pain. Raj never left her side, feeding her ice chips, massaging her back, advocating with nurses when needed. When the doctor suggested an emergency C-section due to the baby's dropping heart rate, Raj held Priya's trembling hand as she nodded her consent through tears. I'm scared, she whispered as they prepared her for surgery. I know, he answered honestly. Me too. But we're doing this together, and soon we'll meet our daughter. In the operating room, bright lights and the metallic smell of antiseptic made everything seem surreal. Raj, dressed in sterile scrubs, sat by Priya's head, his eyes never leaving hers as the doctors worked on the other side of a blue drape. Talk to me, Priya pleaded, her voice shaking. So Raj spoke of everything and nothing, their first date at the Botanical Gardens, the apartment they'd first shared with its leaky faucet and temperamental oven, the future vacations they'd take with Kavita. Words flowed from him, creating a buffer between Priya and her fear. And then, cutting through his stream of consciousness, came a sound that stopped the world, a high, indignant cry that could only be their daughter announcing her arrival. She's here, the doctor said, lifting a tiny, squirming bundle momentarily before whisking her to a nearby table for assessment. Is she okay? Priya asked anxiously, unable to see what was happening. Before Raj could answer, a nurse brought their swaddled daughter to them, placing her gently on Priya's chest. Tiny, Perfect, with a shock of dark hair and her mother's delicate features, Kavita blinked up at them with unfocused eyes. In that moment, looking at his wife and daughter together, Raj understood something that all his professional success had never taught him. This was what it meant to be truly rich, truly successful. This small family, born from love, tested by pain, and now reunited in the most profound way possible. When he had laughed at Priya's goodbye letter all those months ago, he couldn't have imagined standing here now, transformed by the journey of almost losing everything he hadn't known he wanted. "Welcome to the world, Kavita," he whispered, one hand on his daughter's tiny form, the other still holding Priya's. "We've been waiting for you." The first week at home with Kavita was a beautiful chaos that neither Raj nor Priya had been fully prepared for. Sleep became a precious commodity, measured in fragmented hours between feedings and diaper changes. Their once orderly apartment transformed into a landscape of burp cloths, swaddle blankets, and half-finished cups of tea. "Did you ever imagine it would be like this?" Priya asked one night as they sat together on the sofa, Kavita finally asleep in her bassinet nearby. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes, but she looked more content than Raj had seen her in months. "Not even close," he admitted, stifling a yawn. "The books didn't mention how terrifying it is to clip fingernails that tiny." Priya laughed softly. "Or how many outfit changes one small baby could need in a single day." Despite the exhaustion, Raj found himself relishing these challenging moments. When he woke at 3 a.m. to Kavita's hungry cries, he would bring her to Priya for feeding, then take the baby afterward for burping and changing, allowing his wife to fall back asleep. He learned to decipher different cries, hungry, tired, uncomfortable, and discovered he had more patience than he'd ever known. His colleagues were surprised when Raj announced he was taking his full 8 weeks of paternity leave. "The project launch is in 6 weeks, his team lead had. "And there will be other launches," Raj had replied confidently. "But my daughter will only be a newborn once." One evening, when Kavita was nearly 3 weeks old, Priya's parents came to visit. As they cooed over their granddaughter, Raj noticed Priya's father watching him with a thoughtful expression. Later, while Priya and her mother were discussing feeding schedules in the nursery, her father approached Raj in the kitchen. "I have to admit," he said, helping Raj prepare tea, "I had my doubts about whether you could change." Raj nodded, understanding the older man's skepticism. "I had doubts myself. But seeing you with my granddaughter, with my daughter." He paused, emotion making his voice rough. "You've become the man I always hoped would be her husband." The word struck Raj deeply. "Thank you, uncle. That means more than you know." As they carried the tea tray to the living room, Raj reflected on how far they'd come. Just 6 months ago, he had been a man who put work above everything, who valued success more than connection. Now, his priorities had shifted so completely that sometimes he barely recognized his former self. That night, after their visitors had left and Kavita was sleeping, Raj found Priya standing in the nursery, gazing down at their daughter. "I found something today," she said softly as he joined her. From her pocket, she pulled out a folded piece of paper. Raj recognized it immediately, the goodbye letter that had started their journey. "Where did you find it?" he asked, his heart beating faster at the sight of it. "In your dresser drawer. I was looking for a t-shirt to sleep in." She unfolded it carefully. "I haven't read it since I wrote it." Together, they looked down at the words that had nearly ended their marriage, words of pain, disappointment, and lost hope. Raj felt a pang of shame remembering how he had laughed at this letter, dismissing Priya's feelings as dramatic overreaction. "It feels like it was written by a different person," Priya murmured. "Like reading a stranger's thoughts." "Are you still unhappy?" Raj asked, the question that had been lingering in his mind for months. Priya looked up at him, then down at their sleeping daughter. "No," she said finally. "Not unhappy. Tired, overwhelmed sometimes, still healing, but not unhappy." She reached for his hand. "We're building something new, something better than before." Impulsively, Raj took the letter from her hands. "Then we don't need this anymore." He tore it in half, then in quarters, the sound of ripping paper unnaturally loud in the quiet nursery. Priya watched him, her expression unreadable, as he continued tearing until the letter was nothing but confetti-sized pieces. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making room for a new story," he replied, gathering the pieces. "One where I don't take you for granted, where I remember what matters." They walked to the kitchen together, where Raj dropped the fragments into the trash. As they fell from his fingers, he felt a weight lifting, not the weight of guilt or regret, but the shadow of who he had once been. Later that night, as they lay in bed with Kavita sleeping peacefully in her bassinet beside them, Priya curled against Raj's side for the first time since before their separation. The simple physical contact, her head on his shoulder, her arm draped across his chest, felt like coming home. "I was thinking," she said quietly, "maybe we could start a new tradition. On Kavita's birthday each year, we could write letters to each other, not goodbye letters, but letters of appreciation, of hopes for the coming year." Raj pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I'd like that. And this time, I promise to take every word seriously." As they drifted toward sleep, Kavita made a small sound, not quite a cry, just a reminder of her presence. Raj reached out to gently touch her tiny hand, marveling as her fingers instinctively curled around his. 6 months ago, he had laughed at a letter and nearly lost everything that mattered. Now, with his wife beside him and his daughter's hand in his, he understood the lesson he'd been given. True happiness wasn't found in ambition or achievement, but in the quiet moments of connection that made a life worth living. 1 year later, the golden afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows as friends and family gathered in Raj and Priya's apartment. Colorful balloons and streamers adorned the walls, and a homemade banner proclaimed, "Happy First Birthday, Kavita," in bold letters. At the center of it all sat the birthday girl herself, wearing a yellow dress with tiny flowers, wide-eyed at all the attention. "I can't believe it's been a year already," Priya's mother said, helping arrange platters of food on the dining table. "It seems like just yesterday we were rushing to the hospital." Raj nodded, watching as Kavita pulled herself up using the coffee table, her recent milestone of standing still a source of immense pride for both parents. "Fastest year of my life," he agreed. As guests mingled and cooed over Kavita, Raj found himself taking mental photographs of every moment, his daughter's delighted expression when presented with her first-ever birthday cake, the way she clapped her tiny hands at the singing, how she buried her face shyly in Priya's shoulder when everyone cheered. These were the treasures he had almost missed, the everyday miracles he had nearly sacrificed for spreadsheets and deadlines. Later, after Kavita had been put to bed exhausted from the excitement, and the last guests had departed, Raj and Priya sat amidst the aftermath of celebration, wrapping paper scattered across the floor, gifts piled on chairs, leftover cake waiting to be stored. "Should we clean up?" Raj asked, stifling a yawn. Priya shook her head, leaning back against the sofa. "Tomorrow is soon enough. I'm too tired to move." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the kind that comes from shared fatigue and contentment. Then Priya reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I didn't forget our promise," she said, handing it to him. 1 year since Kavita was born. My letter to you." Raj's eyes widened. With everything involved in planning the birthday party, he had completely forgotten their agreement to write letters on their daughter's birthday. Guilt flashed across his face. "I forgot," he admitted. "With all the party preparations." To his surprise, Priya laughed. "I know. That's why I wrote yours too." She produced a second envelope. "From you to me. You can read it, and if it says what you would have written, you can sign it. If not, you can write your own." Relief and love washed over him. "How did I get so lucky?" "Open mine first," she urged, tucking her feet under her on the sofa. Carefully, Raj opened the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. Priya's handwriting, neat and slightly slanted to the right, filled the page. My dear Raj, a year ago today, our lives changed forever when Kavita came into the world. But the truth is, our lives had already begun changing months before, when I wrote a very different kind of letter, one I never actually expected you to take seriously. I was wrong about that. You did take it seriously, eventually. And in doing so, you proved to me that people can change when what they stand to lose matters enough to them. This year has been the hardest and most beautiful of my life. I've watched you transform from a husband who barely noticed me to a father who notices everything, Kavita's first smile, her first tooth, the specific cry that means she's hungry versus the one that means she's tired. I've seen you choose us, consistently, day after day, in small ways and large ones. When you declined the promotion that would have meant more travel, you chose us. When you leave work meetings to make it home for dinner, you choose us. When you get up at 2 a.m. so I can sleep a little longer, you choose us. A marriage isn't saved in a single grand moment. It's saved in 1,000 small choices, and you've made those choices every day. I love you not despite our difficult journey, but partly because of it. The man you've become, thoughtful, present, balanced, is the partner I always hoped for and the father Kavita deserves. Thank you for laughing at my goodbye letter, and then crying when you found the pregnancy test. Those tears showed me your heart was still open to change. With all my love, Priya. Raj looked up, his eyes wet. It's perfect. Better than anything I could have written. Read yours now, Priya said softly. The second letter was shorter, but as Raj read the words Priya had written on his behalf, he found they captured exactly what was in his heart. My beloved Priya, 1 year ago, you gave me the greatest gift. But months before that, you gave me something equally precious, the wake-up call that saved our family before it had even fully formed. Thank you for not giving up on me when you had every reason to. Thank you for your patience as I learned how to be present, how to listen, how to put family above ambition. Your strength has been our foundation. When I look at Kavita, I see your eyes, your determination, your gentleness. When I look at you, I see the woman who was brave enough to walk away and compassionate enough to give me another chance. I promise to never again take for granted the life we're building together. I promise to remember, every day, that the most important meetings I'll ever have are the ones around our dinner table. The day I found that pregnancy test was the day my real life began. Thank you for this year of growth, challenges, exhaustion, and immeasurable joy. All my love, Raj. Without hesitation, Raj signed his name at the bottom of the letter. This says exactly what's in my heart. How do you know me so well? Priya smiled, taking both letters and placing them in a small decorative box she'd kept on a bookshelf. Because I see you now. The real you. And you see me too. As they finally began cleaning up the birthday decorations, moving around each other in the easy rhythm they'd developed over the past year, Raj reflected on their journey. From a man who laughed at his wife's pain to a father who cried with gratitude for his family, it had been a transformation he never saw coming, but one he would be forever thankful for. The goodbye letter that had almost ended everything had instead become the beginning of something far more meaningful than he could